Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Some Republican presidential contenders are campaigning today ahead of the holiday weekend. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis spent time in New Hampshire, while Vivek Ramaswamy made his pitch to Iowa voters. Despite their efforts in early voting states, recent polling does show former President Donald Trump still holds a commanding lead over his rivals. Some of the lowest polling candidates are now facing pressure to consider dropping out and consolidating the field so that perhaps someone else could mount a strong challenge against the former president. Olivia Rinaldi and Finn Gomez join us now here at the table. Olivia is a CBS News campaign reporter. Finn is CBS News' political director. Great to have you both here. We appreciate it. Let's begin by listening to what Florida Governor Ron DeSantis had to say about former President Donald Trump.
I think at the end of the day, Trump is the best turnout machine for the Democrats because he will ignite a lot of voters to want to come out and vote against him. And that gives the Democrats a big advantage. They know Biden's weak. They know that the direction of the country is poor, but that is their lifeline.
He's making an electability argument against former President Trump, Finn. He's not making a kind of direct case against Trump's conduct or character or policy. What do you make of DeSantis's closing argument as the Iowa caucuses loom just a few weeks away?
55 days away, Bob, and he's like, it feels like he's turning up the dial just a little bit more, increasing his criticism towards the front runner in this race, in this primary race. And I think that, now is the time, for these candidates to really mount their best argument to be the top alternative to Donald Trump. And I think that's what he's trying to do here.
Olivia, you've been in touch with strategists who are close to traditional Republican candidates who are not aligned with the Trump wing of the party. We talked about in the introduction to this discussion how there is pressure from some donors and others to consolidate, to shrink the field. We're getting close to December. What's going on behind the scenes to nudge people in that direction, if anything?
As you mentioned, I've spoken to some Republican operatives, and they are really encouraged by the fact that Mike Pence dropped out in October and that Tim Scott just dropped out a few weeks ago ahead of the Iowa caucuses. They see Nikki Haley on this momentum. She's rising in the polls, and they really think that there's this opportunity for someone to consolidate in the GOP, to consolidate around one candidate, especially heading into South Carolina. That's where they think they have the best opportunity to really consolidate around one candidate and take on Donald Trump in that state, heading then into Super Tuesday on March 5th.
But to become that candidate, Finn, it's really, there's a race within a race.
Right.
Governor DeSantis versus former Ambassador Haley, then former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie almost in his own space as someone who's fiercely against former President Trump. But in that dynamic between DeSantis and Haley, DeSantis is really looking for a bounce in Iowa. That's his strategy. Will he get the endorsement of Bob Vanderplaats, the longtime evangelical activist in that state?
That is the expectation, Bob. And what we're hearing from our sources in Iowa is that he is nearing that decision, and it looks like it will be the governor of Florida. There is, there's been that momentum. Our own Aaron Navarro, CBS News' Aaron Navarro reported last week in a private setting with donors that DeSantis did say that he was expecting to get this endorsement this week as early as Tuesday.
But does it matter, Finn?
It matters to a degree. It matters with evangelicals in Iowa to a degree. Just that consolidation that Olivia was just talking about, that's something that he's trying to garner. It's all in for him in Iowa. He's thrown his campaign there, as other campaigns have also thrown their sources all into Iowa. It's Iowa or bust for a lot of these guys. But there's still New Hampshire. There's only about 2 or 3 tickets out of Iowa to New Hampshire. Who can win Iowa? Means that they can get to New Hampshire. But you still look at that margin, Bob. You still look at that margin. Donald Trump is so far ahead. You're looking 30 points at the latest average of recent polls in Iowa compared to the rest of the field. There's still a long way to go for a lot of these guys.
Olivia, Finn mentioned that many contenders are putting their chips in Iowa. They're trying to make a real play for Iowa. One of those contenders is Vivek Ramaswamy. Let's hear what he had to say on the campaign trail.
Trump got as far as he was going to get, and I respect him for it. He rolled over that log, and we saw what crawled out. Now it's up to the next generation to bring the pesticide, okay?
So, Mr. Ramaswamy, the outsider, the entrepreneur, you've covered him a lot, Olivia, over the past few months. He's making this case for a generational change within the Republican Party. He's living in Iowa. He's at least bought an apartment there, rented an apartment there for the time being. What's his outlook in Iowa? And is he facing any pressure from Trump allies to maybe get out of the way? Because he is aligned with Trump, but he's still running against him, too.
Vivek Ramaswamy is going to hold 220 plus events in Iowa.
Wait, fact check. Is that possible?
I mean, he hopes to do it. He says he's planning 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., 9 p.m. some nights, doing these events, seeing as many voters as he possibly can. 200 events is nothing to sneeze at. That's a lot.
There are 99 counties in Iowa.
I didn't get the chance to ask him if he was going to do a full Grassley, but I think he might try to. DeSantis, of course, is on that course currently. He's at 98 counties, I believe, and saving something special for 99. But, it's possible. That's a lot of events to hold over a pretty large state where voters like to see effort. They like to see people going to them. They like to see people talking to them, kitchen table issues. So there might be some way for him to sort of break through in these last couple of weeks. On the question, though, of whether Trump supporters have asked him to drop out, there is a lot of that. A lot of people who go to his events are America First, Make America Great Again Republicans, and they like him, but they also like Trump, and they fear that he is taking away some of that voter share that could be going to the former president.
Yeah, I mean, he's holding seven events tomorrow. I mean, he might do like a double Grassley, frankly, at this point, if he holds to these events that he's claiming. I do want to see, Bob, like looking at New Hampshire real quick. I did have a conversation with Governor Sununu earlier today, and he's looking to make an endorsement right soon after the Thanksgiving holiday, in the weeks as early as the week after, maybe a little further out. But he's looking at those three top alternatives: DeSantis, Haley, and Christie.
Read the tea leaves up in New Hampshire. Where is he leaning?
I think he's torn. I think it could be Haley, or if DeSantis is garnering momentum. But the person that we're seeing garner the most momentum out of the early states is Nikki Haley. It's essentially her and Donald Trump who are garnering any sort of movement. So
I wonder about Governor Christie, because the former New Jersey governor,
no, you're right.
New Hampshire's an open primary, and you can have those independent voters and Democrats say, we want Christie in the race.
Yeah. There are people, Democrats, who I've heard from who like Christie. They like his policies. He's not Trump, but it'll be interesting to see if he's actually able to garner some of that turnout from them.
Well, much to discuss in the coming days and weeks. Olivia Rinaldi, Finn Gomez, thank you very much for stopping by. Tensions on Capitol Hill, they erupted last week with several heated incidents. Ahead, we analyze the ongoing struggle for civility in Washington. We need a little bit more of it. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Capitol Hill has seen its fair share of heated exchanges, but last week was, well, unusually chaotic.
Kevin McCarthy walked by and he elbowed me in the kidneys as he walked by.
You're quite confident this was deliberate?
If you want to run your mouth, we can be two consenting adults. We can finish it here.
Okay, that's fine. Perfect.
You want to do it now?
I'd love to do it right now.
Well, stand your butt up then.
You stand your butt up.
Oh, hold on.
Big guy.
Oh, stop it.
You're doing stuff with your brother. The American people have the same questions. Why should they believe you? Why should they believe you?
Yale University History and American Studies professor Joanne Freeman joins us now. Professor, we really appreciate you coming. You're the author of The Field of Blood, Violence in Congress, and the Road to Civil War. We appreciate all of your scholarship and reporting. Using your vantage point from history, what do you make of what has happened in Washington in the past week? Is this something that's unusual, or is this something that is indicative of deeper dynamics in the country when it comes to social unrest and political unease?
I'm going to be a real historian and say both. And on the first hand, I would say that there's a long history of misbehavior in Congress. Right? The book that I wrote that you just had the cover of talks about physical violence in Congress leading up to the Civil War between 1830 and 1860. And I found roughly 70 physically violent incidents in the House and Senate. Now, a lot of them were deliberate. A lot of them had to do with Southerners trying to bully Northerners into silence on the question of slavery. So on the one hand, in American politics generally and in Congress, there is a history of violence, a lot of it behind the scenes. Some of the violent incidents I researched actually were censored out of the record. But that all said, what we're seeing now, and I think that was particularly true with Senator Mullen in the Senate hearing, we're seeing the normalization of a certain amount of threats, violence, behavior that, as Bernie Sanders said, you're a U.S. Senator, sit down. As a historian, writing about a time period when there were Southerners bullying others and there were Northerners essentially saying now and again, sit down, this is the U.S. Congress, the echoes are eerie. And I'm not saying, and I always feel the need to say this, I'm not announcing I think we're on the edge of a civil war, but what I am saying is that what's interesting about this moment is people who are not only feeling free to be violent or threatening in that way, but are proud of it. Senator Mullen, I think, on an interview that he said his constituents want him to behave in that way. There's one of the members of Congress in my book said that roughly 1842. So, I would hope that that's not true for most of the constituents of that particular senator, but we're seeing in any number of ways, and just in the last week or so also, in the rhetoric coming from presidential candidate Donald Trump, a degree of violence, rhetoric, but more than rhetoric, because rhetoric makes it sound kind of ethereal and non-threatening. These are threats. And this is not the way a democratic polity operates. It doesn't operate based on threats. There are systems, there are policies, there's a constitution, there's the rule of law, there are all kinds of rules in Congress. There are any number of things that should be taking hold of this moment and aren't.
Professor, we so often use the word, and hear the word at least, unprecedented when it comes to this moment in American politics. But in your book, you write about how in 1856, Congressman Preston Brooks used a cane to beat Senator Charles Sumner. What was the reaction to that in Washington, and was that a flashpoint in that era?
Well, it was a flashpoint. Partly, people assume that the caning of Charles Sumner is the only violent incident in Congress, and it was far from it. It came after a series of violent incidents, one right after another. It particularly, and I don't mean to be using a pun here, struck home, not just in Washington, but more so in the North and South, because it was literally in the Senate chamber, a South Carolina representative beating a Massachusetts senator to the ground with a cane, breaking the cane in the process of beating him. So this was an actual physical beating. It was also highly symbolic. So in the South, they cheered Brooks on. They sent him celebratory canes. In the North, they held what they called indignation meetings, which are precisely what they sound like, meetings of people who got together and said, this is not how the North can be treated. And part of the response to not specifically the caning of Sumner, but that kind of behavior was that Northerners began to elect more assertive members of Congress, people who would come to Congress and said, and actually would rise to their feet when bullied by Southerners, they would say, we're not here to be treated that way anymore. We're going to push back. They didn't necessarily come wanting to fight, but they made it very clear that they were not going to roll over for that kind of bullying anymore. And, it made a difference. It didn't solve problems, but it certainly, at least temporarily, cowed Southerners or schooled Southerners in the fact that they did not own the floor of the Capitol, the House and Senate.
And just briefly here, in about 30 seconds, Professor, it is Thanksgiving week. Any quick advice to those who are facing contentious conversations at the dinner table later this week?
I guess I would say to them what I would say about American politics generally, which is don't normalize violent talk. Don't assume that because a presidential candidate is talking this way, or your Uncle Bert, that that's normal, right? That it shouldn't be that way. Now, there aren't magical words to make your Uncle Bert behave better, nor to make presidential candidate Donald Trump behave better. But it's worth remembering that things don't have to be that way, that you don't have to put up with that kind of behavior, and that you can sort of move on at the Thanksgiving table. On the national scene, we have to be pretty aware and alert about the fact that this is not a normal election. I'm hoping that everyone out there has a very normal, pleasant Thanksgiving.
The stakes are high with this election. I think we got the title of your next book, How to Deal with Uncle Bert. Professor Freeman, thank you. We appreciate it. People across the country are paying tribute to former First Lady Rosalynn Carter. We'll take a look back at her lasting legacy. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. President Joe Biden has ordered flags at the White House and federal buildings to be lowered to half-staff this Saturday in honor of Rosalynn Carter. The former First Lady died at her home in Georgia on Sunday at the age of 96. She is most known for her work championing mental health research and acting as a trusted advisor to her husband, former President Jimmy Carter. CBS News national correspondent Manuel Borus joins us now. Manny, thank you so much for being here. I've been reading so much about Rosalynn Carter, her legacy as First Lady. You've been in Georgia covering this story. Tell me about that legacy and how people down in the Peach State are rallying to her side and across the country to the family side.
You know, it's so interesting when you talk about learning about her life, which we've been doing in the last several days here. You get a sense of how shy and timid she was growing up as a young woman in Plains, Georgia. But then as her husband began to seek political office, first state office here in Georgia, and then the White House, she really found some sort of confidence and some fire in her to really not just be a political wife, but in their view, political partners. And I think that's one of the things that's so remarkable. Some of the firsts that she had as a First Lady, if you will. One is sitting in on cabinet meetings at the White House. That was something that a First Lady had not done before. And it did ruffle some feathers, but she did not seem to mind that. And former President Carter didn't seem to mind it either. In fact, he called her, of course, his closest advisor, something she did really so that when they had private conversations later about the problems of the country and the world, they can really actually talk about it. But also, you mentioned the trying to destigmatize mental illness and improve mental health in this country and the way that it's treated. Only one other First Lady before her, Eleanor Roosevelt, had gone before Congress. This was something that she went ahead and did and actually sought to enact some legislative changes to bring about changes to the way that the country talked about mental health, but also the way that it was treated in this country. So I think those are some of the really important items in her legacy as First Lady.
Manny, when President Carter went into hospice care a while ago, I went down to Plains, and I was really moved walking around President Carter's boyhood home, the home where the Carters lived up until Mrs. Carter's death a few days ago. I'm wondering, what are the funeral plans? How are they going to incorporate at the Carter Center in Atlanta and the Carter Presidential Library and celebrate her legacy? How are they going to balance Atlanta and Plains? What are you hearing about all of those plans?
What we're hearing so far is that Monday there will be a wreath-laying ceremony at her alma mater. That's a university in Americus, Georgia, which is not far from Plains. On Tuesday, there are some events and remembrances that are scheduled to be held here in Atlanta at the Carter Center. And then Wednesday of next week, there will be a procession through the streets of Plains where the public is expected to line the street, the main street there. But the funeral that will be held at Maranatha Baptist Church, their church, that will be closed and private for just family and friends, and then there will be a private burial at the Carter home there in Plains, Georgia. Just one note, when we were in Plains yesterday, I spoke with the niece of former President Jimmy Carter, and he's 99 years old. He's in hospice care, as you mentioned. We asked what's his level of awareness, and she said, yes, indeed, he is aware that she has passed away and, as expected, is deeply, deeply saddened by it.
What a life. Rosalynn Carter and, of course, President Jimmy Carter hanging in there as tough as they come. Manny, we really appreciate your reporting from down in Plains and down in Atlanta. Manny Borus, thank you so much. And that does it for us here today on America Decides. You can stream this program Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.